What is Republic Act 10121? RA 10121 or the Philippine DRRM Act of 2010 provides a comprehensive, all-hazard, multi-sectoral, interagency, and community-based approach to disaster risk management through the formulation of the National Disaster Risk Management Framework. RA 10121 replaced the National Disaster Coordinating Council with the National Disaster Reduction Management Council or NDRRMC, a coordinating body which was imbued with policymaking, integration, supervision, monitoring, and evaluation functions. The NDRRMC advises the President regarding all phases of disasters, from preparedness to rehabilitation. On top of the NDRRMC organization structure is the Secretary of Department of National Defense as chairperson. RA 10121 mandated the crafting and implementation of the National Disaster Risk Management Framework, which envisions a country of a safer, adaptive, and disaster-resilient Filipino communities towards sustainable development, and the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Plan or the NDRRMP, which aims to provide policies, plans, and programs to deal with disasters in the Philippines. It also serves as the principal guide to disaster risk reduction and management or DRRM efforts to the country. July is declared as National Disaster Consciousness Month, recently renamed as National Disaster Resilience Month or NDRM through EO number 137 series of 1999 to be collectively observed by all Filipinos throughout the country through the conduct of fitting activities for the occasion. Under the core value of safer, adaptive, and disaster-resilient communities, the NDRRMP defines applicable initiatives under 4 thematic areas. These are the 4 themes or thematic areas in Disaster Risk Reduction Management Framework. Number 1, disaster prevention and mitigation. Number 2, disaster preparedness. Number 3, disaster response, and number 4, disaster rehabilitation and recovery. For disaster prevention and mitigation, avoid hazards and mitigate their potential impacts by reducing vulnerabilities and exposure and enhancing capacities of communities. For disaster preparedness, establish and strengthen capacities of communities to anticipate, cope, and recover from the negative impacts of emergency occurrences and disasters. Number 3, disaster response. Provide life preservation and meet the basic subsistence needs of affected population based on acceptable standards during or immediately after a disaster. And the 4th theme, disaster rehabilitation and recovery. Restore and improve facilities and living conditions and capacities of affected communities and reduce risks in accordance with the Building Back Better principle. The concepts of the thematic areas discussed are not mutually exclusive. Their concepts and activities involved overlap with no clear distinction over time. First, they mutually reinforce each other. Activities under each of the areas may affect each other. For instance, appropriate prevention and mitigation can complement the level of preparedness in a community. Second, they do not, should not, and cannot stand alone. Equal attention should be given to all areas. And third, they have no clear starting or ending points. Activities can be under several priority areas. Note, reduce people's vulnerabilities and increase their capacities for the third point. This table lists the activities involved and illustrates the overlap between the different thematic areas. For example, for prevention and mitigation, it overlaps with preparedness. Disaster risk reduction in national and local plans and programs, hazard and risk mapping for these two areas. To better understand how this applies to disaster planning, the following are the roles and overall goals of lead government agencies in the context of the four thematic areas. We have the Department of Science and Technology or DOST for the disaster prevention and mitigation theme. To reduce vulnerabilities and exposure of communities to health hazards, to enhance capacities of communities to reduce their own risks and cope with the impacts of hazards. We have the Department of the Interior and Local Government or DILG for disaster preparedness theme. To increase the level of awareness of the community to threats and impacts of all hazards, equip the community with necessary skills to cope with the negative impacts of a disaster, to increase the capacity, develop and implement disaster preparedness policies and plans, and strengthen partnership among all key stakeholders. We have the Department of Social Welfare and Development or DSWD for disaster response, to decrease the number of preventable deaths and injuries, provide basic subsistence needs of the affected population, and to immediately restore basic social services. And lastly, we have the NEDA, or the National Economic and Development Authority, to restore people's means of livelihood and continuity of economic activities, to restore shelter and other installations, to reconstruct infrastructure and other public utilities, and to assist in the physical and psychological rehabilitation of persons who suffered from the effects of disaster.